these developments in recent months have completely shaken up the way that we look at global trade. There has been a tariff announcement every 3 to 5 days, with last week there being a tariff announcement every day. Stay informed, pay attention to what's going on in the news, but I wouldn't necessarily jump to any conclusions. Get back to your data, model it out, and see what the potential impact would be.
Welcome to The Insight in 15, a brand new podcast from KPMG that takes a closer look at the big issues facing business leaders. I'm Stuart Burt from KPMG, and today we're going to be talking about US tariffs. And who better to join me than someone who's advised businesses on both sides of the Atlantic on trade? Jenna Glass, Director of Trade and Customs here at KPMG. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Our very first guest on the podcast. So
Yes.
Thank you for joining. Right, we're going to stick religiously to 15 minutes, so let's get straight to it. I wanted to just get to grips with where we are at right now on tariffs, because clearly a lot has happened since April. We had the so-called Liberation Day. We then had a 90-day pause that was supposed to come to an end end of last week. We now have a new deadline of the 1st of August. Can you just explain where we're at right now?
Yeah, definitely. So definitely a lot going on right now since the start of the administration. And interestingly, I looked it up last week that in the last 150 days, there has been a tariff announcement every 3 to 5 days, with last week there being a tariff announcement every day of the week. So a lot to kind of wrap your head around and try and parse out what's real and what's not. But where we are today is the July 9th deadline came and went. We started to see a couple of trade deals come together in preparation for that. But despite the administration's 90 deals and 90-day target, we only saw 3 in that time frame, that being with China, with the UK, importantly, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and then Vietnam was announced as well. But the administration issued over 20 letters last week threatening new levels of tariffs if deals aren't made by the extension of the August 1st deadline.
And so what happens then between now and the 1st of August? Because in some senses it could be the calm before the storm, but equally there could be a bit of brinkmanship, a bit of discussions about what might happen, a lot of volatility anyway.
Yes.
What happens after then?
Yeah, so I think, well, between now and August 1st, like you mentioned, there will be continued volatility, a lot of discussions, similar to what we've been seeing since April, or really since the start of the administration, of what will come together, what is a negotiating tactic versus what the US is keen on committing to. I would imagine we'll see some additional deals being made, or deal frameworks, as I'm sure you can appreciate. Preparing a comprehensive trade deal takes years. So these are really just frameworks that the countries are putting together. So hopefully between now and August 1st, we'll see some additional deals. And I think what is of great interest to, folks today is the latest on the EU, which late last week was announced a potential of 30% tariffs if a deal is not being made. But otherwise, I imagine the rest of the countries that were either issued letters or even not are going to be trying to get in front of the US to have those discussions and reach more favorable terms to help reduce the impact on the local business.
And I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you think the 1st of August is a hard deadline?
I would think not.
No.
In part based on what we've seen to date, that it has been a little bit of a moving target. And also, depending on how close countries are to reaching a deal, maybe we'll see another extension.
Indeed.
Yes.
But one country that doesn't have a letter sent its way, partly because we do have that trade agreement, is the UK.
Yes.
So I just wanted to touch on the deal that was struck. It was struck a little while ago. It took a little bit of time to get it signed and over the line, but it has been now put into force. Can you just explain what is actually covered in that? What's already in force? What comes in later as well?
Yes. So right now, We are really just seeing relief as it pertains to automobiles and automobile parts, which the first 100,000 cars imported into the US will be imported at a 10% tariff. Every car thereafter will be at 27.5%, so quite a significant hike. On the other side, the aerospace industry saw some relief with this deal. They went from 10% tariffs to 0% tariffs into the US, and there's no quota currently on the aerospace industry. One additional benefit for the UK is 25% on steel and aluminum and their derivative products, while the rest of the world is being faced with 50%. Are we going to see a continued decrease on what those tariffs for the UK might be, potentially, as the conversations are still ongoing with the UK?
So there is some positive impact for
Yes.
some businesses in some sectors, but if you take a look at the landscape more generally, 10% tariffs on goods going into the US from the UK is still there. Doesn't
Yes.
seem like that's going to change. And so, if not that, where else might we negotiate further? Because, as you say, it takes a long time to create these deals.
Yes.
And I think when this was first announced, it was really positioned as the start of a negotiation rather than the
Right.
end. Are there any other areas that we're keeping an eye on that the UK might want to go further, or even the US might want to go further as well on technology, for example?
Yeah, I mean, there is a whole slew of sector-based or industry-based investigations going on that the US is leading to see what specific industries are harming the US economy, such as pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, conflict minerals, lumber. It'll be important to see how these investigations play out because, for example, with pharmaceuticals, there's a rumor of 200% out there. And that would definitely be in the UK's interest to further negotiate what that means for the UK market.
200%. That is quite a change from where we are now. Even if that doesn't come to pass and the other tariffs that are being suggested in other areas as well, surely that is shaping market activity now in anticipation of what might happen.
Yes, it is. But companies are getting a little bit more comfortable with the
Mm.
disruption. So in the beginning, we would see companies, frantically evaluating whether or not they should pick up and move their entire supply chain operations, let's say from China to Vietnam or from the UK to Switzerland or what have you. But now, seeing at the rapid pace of change, companies are taking a minute. They're getting access to their data. They're understanding first and foremost the revenue impact. And then they're mapping their supply chains to understand who's doing business where, what are different modeling scenarios that they can play out to maybe source products from different countries to help minimize. And some companies are taking action in terms of resourcing, but most companies, I think, are just currently arming themselves with the data. And that way, no matter what comes to pass, they understand what their business is doing, where they're at, and what tweaks they need to make to help minimize any potential damage.
So you say that businesses are getting prepared, they've had a couple of months to adjust to what might be coming down the track. Do you think the mood music is a bit more positive amongst UK businesses than some are saying?
I wouldn't go that far. These developments in recent months have completely shaken up the way that we look at global trade. We went from an era of free or preferential trade where we were lowering trading barriers throughout the world to now pretty significant tariff barriers. So, how companies strategically organize themselves throughout the globe? Are they going to offshore as much? Are they going to bring in more operations for nearshoring? Bring it onshore to do the work? All remains to be seen. So, I think while companies are still they're in a better position today to understand the impact of these changes. Long-term strategy on what that means for the global economy remains to be seen.
One of the things that I've heard a few people say is that in the UK, because we've already gone through a similar process with Brexit a couple of years ago, we're already well drilled into how to respond to a big event or
Mhm.
moment or development like tariffs. How much do you think there is in that argument?
I've only been in this lovely country for 6 weeks, but what I am hearing is that companies' experience in navigating Brexit has definitely given them a leg up in understanding how to navigate this kind of disruption, what sort of information they need access to understand the impact, and then look to whatever mitigating actions that they can find.
And one of the parallels, I think, and I spent a lot of time here at the firm navigating through those Brexit years. Then and now, there was a lot of volatility in what was happening politically and trying to just keep up to date
Hmm.
with what is happening. The latest social media post from a political leader changes things overnight. What's your advice to business in that environment, trying to get to grips with what's happening in a really fast-paced
Yeah.
environment?
So I do think it's really important to continue to pay attention to the news, even though it can seem like a lot. And, 1 hour, one thing is being said, and the next hour, something completely opposite is being said. But that is how information is disseminated these days, is often through social media platforms. So it's important to pay attention, have a high level understanding of potentially what's coming, but really the devil is in the details on how this will play out. You will find that if there is an announcement of 30% reciprocal with the EU, for example, you will have five different interpretations of what that means in terms of how does that stack on top of other tariffs, or does that mean that this sector tariff no longer applies? So there's a lot to
Mm.
unravel there. So, yes, stay informed, pay attention to what's going on in the news, but I wouldn't necessarily jump to any conclusions. Get back to your data, model it out, and see what the potential impact would be if this tariff is stacking on top of another one, if this replaces one of the industry sector tariffs, because really there's a lot to unpack there.
So you mentioned that businesses are getting prepared right now and they're already on that journey. What does that mean in practical terms? What are the steps that businesses should be taking to get ready for tariffs?
So, first, stay informed. I know it can seem like a lot and maybe make you feel a little bit crazy to follow the headlines, but it's really important to follow along what's coming down the pipe. Two is get access to your data and map out your supply chain. So, this way, no matter what the disruption, no matter what the announcement may be, you understand what that impact is going to be to your organization. Number three, there is an opportunity to renegotiate some of your supplier contracts. I've seen some different degrees of success along those lines, but it's worth taking a look at what your contracts say in terms of tariff payment and liability. And fourth is really going back to your core compliance concepts of country of origin, HS classification, so how your product is classified, and the value of the good. Because with the reciprocal tariffs, origin is key, and the tariff will apply based on the origin of the good. With respect to classification, some parts are subject to additional tariffs where others are not, depending on the classification. So making sure that that classification is accurate can, impact the amount that you are paying on a good. And then that leads us to value and the amount of duty that you're paying. So, duty is tied directly to the value of the goods being imported. So, if your valuation is off, you may be paying more duty than you're supposed to. So, really recommend going to back to those three core compliance pillars.
Look, we're almost out of time. I'm going to end with the final question that I'm going to ask every guest on this podcast. And that is, if you had one thing to advise businesses today on how to respond to tariffs, what would it be?
Get access to your data. And it sounds simple, but we've found with companies and especially really large organizations, it can be difficult to know what data you have, how clean it is, and if you can trust the data. But once you get access to your data, you can map out your supply chain, you can understand the financial impact. And that way, no matter what new development is announced, you are able to go back to your data and quickly understand the impact to you.
Thank you. Very clear. That's all we have time for. Just time to say thank you, Jenna, for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you want to subscribe, you can do on Apple, YouTube, and Spotify. And we'll see you next time for The Insight in 15.